As this pushes closer, it has slowed down, but as it pushes closer, it will make its way, some of those into our area. Look at that, just incredible eye. So the forecast track, and we've got an intermediate advisory coming up at 8 o'clock tonight. Brings a Category 5 hurricane, a 4 or a week 5 into toward the West End, just north of West End. That is Monday night and Tuesday morning. That's its closest approach to Palm Beach County, about 60 miles off our coast. And then it moves toward the Treasure Coast, where it's even closer. And that's why there's a hurricane warning for the Treasure Coast and a hurricane watch for Palm Beach County. It's razor thin, the room for error here. And I caution everyone, get prepared. You know, watches and warnings, shutters should be up or getting them up. Get your last minute supplies, get everything ready to hunker down and stay in place, because this one is making a very close call. There's no margin for error on the right-hand side of this, or on the western side of this track. It is razor thin and a shift of only a few miles toward the west. Let's run a scenario here that it drifts 2, 3, maybe 4 hours to the west on Monday. That places it about 20 to 25 miles closer to us. That brings the hurricane force winds into the coastline in Palm Beach County. It is the margin of error. There is no margin. We have to be exact with this one. And the error cone here, any placement of the hurricane, shift toward the west means much nastier conditions for our area. But there's a close-up of the track, and you can see that turn up paralleling the Treasure Coast. So a hurricane watch in effect for Palm Beach County, hurricane warning for the Treasure Coast. We also have a tropical storm warning for Palm Beach County and a tropical storm watch inland areas of Palm Beach County and the lake, and now a storm surge watch that is for all of the Treasure Coast and Palm Beach County along the coastline. The computer model tracks, of course, taking this with that turn on Monday. That turn should happen between noon and 6 p.m. on Monday and lift the storm to the north. Some of the models make a landfall around the Cape after that. As far as power outages, and these numbers will change, but we're looking at from 1 to 5. Medium risk for power outages as we get into Monday night and Tuesday from some of those gusty winds in this storm. I want to toss it over to James Whelan with a look at the radar and a close-up look at our local weather.
Yeah, let's time out when these winds are going to get here and what to expect. And as Steve said, some of these outer feeder bands are going to move in overnight tonight and even into tomorrow morning. And inside any of those little cells in there will contain some very gusty winds or even a tornado threat here. But let's time out what we think. Now, these are the wind gusts here, and this is what you need to prepare for, too. So we'll stop it here. Monday morning time frame, you see already some gusts. The tropical storm force. The sustained winds will be much significantly lower than this, but inside any of those squalls that move through, could see a 44 mile per hour wind gust and a 30, 40 mile per hour wind gust as we go through Tuesday morning. Look at this, they bump way up, 52, 62 mile per hour wind gusts. That's the closest approach to Palm Beach County there will be early Tuesday. By midday Tuesday or so, the closest approach to the Treasure Coast. And then finally, winds start to relax here. And by Wednesday morning, we're back to maybe 20 to 30 and continuing to drop. So the hour by hour here as we go into West Palm, you see as we go through the day tomorrow, it continues to ramp up and even into Tuesday morning too. Now, how about rainfall? Again, with that razor thin line of wind, we have the same with the rainfall. We have 15 plus inches just offshore. For us, we're right on the line there. If we get any of those feeder bands to line up straight with the coast and continue to train in the same area, these numbers here will be a lot higher. But 4 or 5 plus inches, maybe up to 6 to 7 in some localized area, that's what we can expect. Now, coming up in a few minutes, we're going to explain some science behind why we think that's going to turn and why it's so difficult to forecast.
James, thank you. Right now, mandatory evacuations are ordered in parts of Palm Beach County. Evacuations are in place for zones A and B. Zone A includes mobile homes, substandard housing, and low-lying areas that are prone to flooding. Zone B generally includes the Barrier Islands, areas north and south of the Jupiter Inlet, and other surge vulnerable areas south along the intercoastal down to the Broward County line.
If you choose not to evacuate to a shelter, please evacuate miles, not hundreds of miles. We encourage you to stay within the county to shelter in place.
There are now 9 general population shelters open in Palm Beach County, also a special needs shelter at the South Florida Fairgrounds, and a pet-friendly shelter at the West Boynton Park and Rec Center. You can find all this information about evacuation zones and shelters on WPTV.com.
Boynton Beach Police, too, were out this afternoon making sure residents are taking evacuation orders seriously.
Attention Briny Breeze residents. Mandatory evacuation is now in place. Please collect your belongings, vacate, and seek shelter.
This is a theme again and again. Please pay heed to what county officials, to what first responders are urging you to do if you're in an evac zone. You can see many of the windows in Briny Breeze's mobile home park are shuttered. Officers went door to door making sure everyone knew they should get out. And Briny Breeze is not far from the beach, and you saw in that piece of video water already coming up through some of the storm drains.
The governor is suspending tolls on the Florida Turnpike, Alligator Alley, and the Sawgrass Expressway. This is done to help ease any congestion that we might encounter after people start heading out, leaving the area of the storm. Troopers say that they will be out to help with those traffic jams.
You've heard Steve talk about this consistently. Martin County emergency ops officials say keeping an eye on that forecast is so crucial because any kind of wobble, just a matter of maybe 20 miles or so, could make for a much more immediate impact, a major impact of the storm. We're watching that closely, of course. In the meantime, be prepared. Hopefully you're all done with your preps. But in Martin County, they say residents need to evacuate if they live in Zone A or B. They have 4 shelters set up, and curfews will likely come after the storm.
Curfews will not be in effect until there's a public safety reason for it. So I would suspect that I'm the one that would impose a curfew that would not be until after the storm.
Martin County Sheriff William Snyder, again, right now evacuations in Martin County are for people who live in Zone A or B. You can check with local officials on that or WPTV.com if you're not quite sure if you're in A or B.
Indian River County's Emergency Management Division is warning some residents to evacuate as soon as they can, and that applies to people who live east of US 1, including the Barrier Islands, and anyone who lives in a manufactured home. A mandatory evacuation order in Indian River County for those areas begins at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. Indian River County has 6 shelters open, including 1 for people with special needs and 1 for people who have pets. All that list, complete information on WPTV.com.
You live in a mobile home or low-lying area on North and South Hutchinson Island, emergency officials say you need to leave. Tomorrow morning at 8, access to the Barrier Islands will be limited. Eventually, you may not be able to get on or off the island at all. After the storm, you'll need to prove that you live on Hutchinson Island to get back on. Still looking for a shelter in St. Lucie County? You'll find general population ones set up at Fort Pierce Central High, Lakewood Park Elementary, Treasure Coast High School, and a special needs shelter at the Haverdale Finn Center.
And whether you are staying in your home,
again, there's other reports coming in, cars being tossed around. Right here, see that car right in the background, just tossed around. This is from Marsh Harbor, about a few hours ago, not long ago. These videos just really show the impact that we've been talking about, that our meteorologists have been saying, those sustained winds. This is a monster storm, and this is the effect of it right here. And it's starting to come in. We're getting a lot of more video coming in from the Bahamas, and specifically those areas in the Bahamas that are devastated. And this is just the beginning, unfortunately. It's a very sad and ominous sight, and that's why we want to keep everybody informed. Michael Kelly, back to you.
Jay, thank you. We're back in 2 minutes. Our hearts go out to everyone in the Bahamas, and soon our help will head their way as well. Coming up, Palm Beach County Sheriff Rick Bradshaw joining us with his messages as we prepare for Dorian.
this high enough?
Leo, can you make sure it's your, yeah, it's that button right
Yeah.
there.
Yeah.
You can. Ten nine eight seven six.
Tonight, we're joined by Palm Beach County Sheriff Rick Bradshaw. And sir, thank you for being with us. First, for all of our viewers, what are your overarching messages?
Well, people got to pay attention. This, you know what's for sure about this thing? Nothing's for sure. It hasn't acted like anybody thought it was going to, and it keeps edging over this way. So you can't wait till the last minute. Fortunately, we got a little lead time here, so don't wait. Whatever you need to do, take this thing seriously. I mean, the reality of it is this: whether we get tropical storm or we get the full blood of this, we're going to have some things to deal with. Probably some power outages, probably some flooding on the roads. We've got the shelters already open, so there's going to be some things that are going to happen here. We're going to be going through something. The magnitude is up in the air right now, but you need to take this serious.
And we have a lot of people who have just moved to Florida. They've never been through this. You know, as lifetime Floridians, we've all been through this many times and have a little idea of what to expect. What advice for people who have no idea what's to come?
Don't think it's just a little bit of wind. You've seen some pictures of what's happening down there in the Bahamas. This is a big boy. This is strong. I mean, I've been through some hurricanes, nothing like this.
Sheriff, talk about shelters. You have spoken about this in the last few days. First, generally speak about shelters and the need to heed the advice of first responders, of deputies. But as part of that, some of the immigrant community said they were worried about going because they thought their immigration status would be checked, so they were steering clear. Talk to both pieces of that. First, shelters generally, listening to you all. Second, that other question.
Yeah, if you're in one of the areas that we've already said you need to get out, now's the time to go there. And the reason we waited till a point in time, we didn't want people to have to be in the shelters too long, because you only have a certain amount of space for yourself, which brings me to my first point. You got a little bit of space, you're going to have to share. Be patient, be courteous, don't let your tempers get out of hand, and things will be fine. The second thing is, you got to understand, you can't bring weapons, no guns. All right, I don't care if you got a concealed weapons permit or not. You can't come in there with a gun, and your bags are subject to search. So lock it in your car or leave it at home. My best thing is leave it at home.
And the immigration question.
Yeah, we've gotten some calls from people who are scared. Look, my status here is up in question, and I don't have the right paperwork. I'm afraid to go to the shelters. Don't be afraid. We're not there to check your immigration status. We're not there to see if you're illegal here in the country or not. We are interested in your safety. Be safe. Be safe for you. Be safe for your family. That's your first priority. Our first priority is making sure you're safe. We're not going to worry about whether you're here illegally or not. We want you to get to the shelter, feel comfortable, bring your family there.
Sheriff, talk about curfews, and we see them often after the storm passes.
Yeah. If we have to do that, and we're praying we don't have to. Last time we had different curfews all over the place. This time I've talked with the police chiefs, and we're going to have one county-wide curfew, whatever those hours might be. Now, if you're in a city that's not hit as hard, and there might be some places open, the city doesn't have to enforce those hours. They can move it back a little bit and say, well, it may be dusk to dawn, but we're only going to enforce or start at 10 o'clock. That's fine. But we're gonna have a standard curfew throughout the county.
What would be the types of things generally that would make you all say, we need to go that route or not?
Yeah, a lot of damage, a lot of power outages. People can't, protect their houses. The lights are out, the power's out, those kind of things.
And that brings up, in addition to that question, people of course worry after the storm. Talk about your manpower resources. You all have to take shelter during the height of the storm. Talk about your disposition of resources before, during, and after the storm to deal with those who would try to take advantage of the situation.
Plenty of resources out there. We're gonna be the full strength out there everywhere without a question. We never tell people at what point in time that we can't navigate the streets. You'd be surprised how long we can stay out there with the equipment that we have. So the message to the people that think that they might go out here and loot and take advantage of, don't even think about it, because we're gonna be out there looking. So the people in the neighborhoods need to feel really good that we're gonna be there to protect you. We're gonna protect the businesses. We actually have a dedicated squad that just goes for businesses to make sure there's no looting. So we're gonna be on the job, and we're gonna be out there through the height of the storm in designated areas that we know that are protected for us, but yet we can get back into the areas we need to very, very quickly.
Well, we hope the men and women of Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office weather the storm safely, as along with all residents of Palm Beach County.
People forget that, I think, law enforcement and the fire department and first responders, they leave their
family at home.
We button it up and come out here to protect the public. And that's why sometimes I get a little agitated when they get down on law enforcement. These people leave their families to come out and make sure you're safe.
Well, know that we appreciate all of our first responders out there on the front lines protecting all of us. And we will be in touch with you, of course, throughout the storm and after with messages about safety. But knowing that you all are out there gives people at least
We'll give you the
we'll get through it.
We'll give you the updates, and everybody needs to take a deep breath, but we got you covered.
Sheriff Bradshaw, thank you.
Okay, thank
We'll
you.
be back in a moment.
Welcome back, everyone. Want to give you an update on our Hurricane Dorian, which is moving through the Bahamas right now with 185-mile-an-hour winds. I'm going to put together some special graphics to give you a cross-section of what's going on with the storm. The outer feeder bands are working now across the Gulf Stream, and some of those will push into South Florida in the next few hours. Those feeder bands contain wind shear and some lightning, some gusty winds, and also a tornado threat is likely as we get it. We may actually see a tornado watch issued at some point because of that. Hurricane hunters are flying through this too. Here's a cross-section shows you just how far up in the atmosphere this goes. There had been an unusual amount of lightning near the center of this during the day, which and lightning usually, and there are research papers on this, whenever there's lightning near a core of a hurricane, there's usually an increase in the intensity. We haven't seen that. It can't get much stronger. It's already at 185 miles an hour. But you can see with this cross-section that some of the storms and the coldest cloud tops reach up 30 to 40,000 feet. This is at the present time, and that will fluctuate. And near the core, as we look down in, that stadium effect that you see when the hurricane hunters break through the eye wall and fly in the storm itself. I don't have a whole lot of room in this one. It's only 10 miles wide, It's a very small eye and eye wall. It's actually smaller than it was even yesterday, and it will fluctuate as it moves through the Bahamas with what we call eye wall replacement cycles, where eye wall breaks down and a new one forms in its place. The laws of physics trying to take hold here. When your hurricane's 185 miles an hour, a lot of physics goes into something like this, and it just to correspond with Mother Nature, things happen in the hurricane to work things out as far as the eye and the eye wall and keeping the structure as best they can. But there's some of the outer feeder bands working way now from Freeport and Grand Bahama past. You know, it's nice, really just breezy and quiet, and then just in 30 seconds you get these very strong winds and heavy downpours. There's one right there. We have another one just kind of trailing, weaker one trailing down from West Palm into Boca. Here's another one that's going to come on shore in probably Stewart and around the North Jupiter Island. We'll keep an eye on that. And each one of these, we have to watch closely because simply it has that threat for popping up a quick tornado or at least some funnel clouds. There's a look at our storm on the GO-16 satellite. It's about 170 miles from the coastline and will continue to move toward the west overnight. There's a little northward component in that west track, which is good because the farther north it gets, the better it is for us. There's a storm that kind of break the hurricane force winds out 45 miles from the center, and the tropical storm force winds stretch out 140. So that wind field has expanded since yesterday. That's a big band there that we'll have to keep an eye on, although I suspect this one's just going to work south. What you really have to do is watch the entire motion of the storm. So we'll continue to see these bands push closer. And then these are moving 40, 50 miles an hour, but toward our direction, they're moving about 5 to 7 miles an hour. They're much slower. So it's going to take a little while for some of these to push in. There is the storm as it moved through Marsh Harbor and Hopetown in the forecast track. It's keeping it as a Category 5 with a turn between noon and 6 p.m. tomorrow, and then lifting up the coast after that. It's a close approach for South Florida. Here's a closer look. With its closest approach to Palm Beach County, that would be on Monday, and then Monday night and Tuesday for the Treasure Coast. It's even closer. And that's why there is a hurricane watch for Palm Beach County and a hurricane warning for the Treasure Coast now and the offshore waters, because it does get closer to the Treasure Coast. Also a tropical storm warning for Palm Beach County, tropical storm watches for the interior and the lake, and a storm surge 2 to 7 feet along the coastline, all the way up and down through Palm Beach County and the Treasure Coast. The computer models, and these will update during the evening. In the next hour or two, we'll start to see some changes as the new models come in, some of them bringing it with a landfall around the Cape, and some of them even closer to our coastline into Monday. So that's why we have to watch that. As far as the probability of power outages, obviously tropical storm force winds and the threat of maybe even some hurricane force winds, we're at about a 2 to a 3 now. So we're climbing into a high probability of some significant power outages, and even more so on the Treasure Coast. I want to toss it over to James. He's going to talk more on why this is turning, what is keeping it with its current motion.
Yeah, so you've heard us talk about these terms here and why it's turning and where it's going and why it's being steered in a certain direction. And we've used these weather terms, the Bermuda High, also known as a ridge, a low pressure system coming, or a trough we call it. But what is that really? Well, the atmosphere is kind of like the ground. It has different elevations. It goes high, it goes low. So if you make this, we simplify it and say, hey, this high pressure, it's like a mountain, right? The storm can't go up and over a mountain. It has to go around the base of the mountain. What's the trough? The trough is like a gutter, right? And the storm is like, well, we'll put a beach ball right there. So the storm right now, it's in between the mountain and the gutter. So what does that ball want to do? Well, it's like putting a ball on flat ground. It's not going to move anywhere. It's just kind of move around a little bit, but it's not going to go in a single direction. If we bring this gutter closer, like it's going to happen, well, the ball is going to want to tend to roll into that gutter and get pulled out. That's what that trough does. It makes that hurricane roll into that. But it's the timing here of when this gutter gets down here to let that ball roll in. If this gutter is a little bit late, that means the storm gets closer to us. It could be a little bit early. That means the storm would be a little bit farther away because it will want to go and roll right into that gutter here. Now, watch what happens on Vipercast. It does just sit here for a little bit. That's where it's waiting for the gutter. And that time frame is tomorrow afternoon. So it's going to sit there. No steering currents, just kind of rolling around a little bit. Then finally, we bring that gutter closer. Here it comes. And then it's going to roll up to the north and then move out to the northeast. This one has it coming very, very close to us. We could still have some tropical storm force or even hurricane force gusts as this gets a little bit closer. Finally, by Wednesday, we're kicking this thing out of here. It's going to roll out the gutter and be out of our hair. Of course, not out of the United States hair, because then it's going to affect the Carolinas there and even parts of Georgia. Coming up a little bit later, we'll time out some of the wind and rain and wave action. That's coming up in just a few minutes. We'll be right back.
Tonight, Florida Governor DeSantis is getting the message out: stay alert and listen to law enforcement.
The governor, like all of us, is monitoring every development of this storm. Resources are available statewide to help families potentially impacted by Dorian. And that includes thousands of National Guard members who are ready to assist.
Listen to their local authorities and have an evacuation plan ready if you are ordered to evacuate. Safety comes first, and you don't want to mess with a storm that is going at 185 miles per hour.
Earlier today, the governor suspended tolls on 9 highways in Florida as Hurricane Dorian approaches. And tonight we have complete coverage on this massive storm.
We once again go to Storm Team 5 Chief Meteorologist Steve Weigel. Steve.
All right, we're going to get a new update, an intermediate advisory from the Hurricane Center soon. It's moving through the Bahamas. It's about 160 miles off. The winds at 185 stronger gusts. What I want to point out here is that the outer feeder bands are starting to work into the Treasure Coast and Palm Beach County. And a quick tornado warning is possible. Don't be surprised. Maybe even a tornado watch. This isn't the most likely area to see tornadoes form in a hurricane. It's more the eastern side, the right side of the track, and the northeastern side. But we've already seen today a couple of tornado warnings back to the west. So we're watching that closely. Wind shear, the issue here is some of these bands work on shore. They naturally get a tendency to rotate. There's a stronger one there, but that's about 40 miles off the coast. These ones are working in. They're not as strong, but they do pack a punch with some gusty winds and some heavy downpours. If you've been in storms before, you know that these feeder bands they're not your typical daytime thunderstorm. The rain comes down. It's near zero visibility, very tricky driving, and the winds they have a heaviness to them just because they're very tropical and just saturated with water. So you know what I'm talking about if you've been through them in the past. And usually we'll get a strong feeder band go through and a bit of a break for half an hour, and then another little stronger feeder band in behind that. Now the storm itself, hurricane force winds out 45 miles from the center. The strongest winds, the winds that we talk about 185 miles an hour, they're right in the core of the hurricane. on the eye wall. And then out 140 miles from the center, those are the tropical storm force winds. Those are the winds from about 39 to a little over 70 miles an hour. Out of the Bahamas is showing a well-defined eye as it made landfall in Marsh Harbor, Hopetown, and headed toward Grand Bahama. I know we have some viewers. We have lots of viewers in the Abacos and back through Grand Bahama. And if you're in Grand Bahama, this is a ferocious storm that's going to be over you for at least a day, possibly two. Some of the models bring it in around West End, and they sit it over this area from Monday to Tuesday late morning. A very dangerous storm, obviously. I'm sure you've heard that already, but you want to shelter in place. And the nasty weather is going to begin for you over the next few hours and continue to pick up overnight. And there's the eye as it moves away from Abaco and now starting to work in to Grand. As far as the track, still just a ferocious hurricane. You know, we'd say 185 over for the last few hours, and you start to get used to it. But 185 miles an hour is a staggering number. And the wind gusts, which typically do a lot of the damage to structures, those wind gusts are over 200 miles an hour. We were looking earlier, they're about 210 to 220, which is just unbelievable. The closest approach to Palm Beach County will be tomorrow and into early Tuesday morning, and then that turn. Now, that turn will happen on the current track between noon and 6 p.m. on Monday. That'll be critical. That is the critical time for us. There is no other critical time. We need a turn, and it happens tomorrow, and then it moves up the coast. But it's close enough to us, and we're almost all of us in the error cone still, that the margin for error is razor thin. Any shift toward the west of this hurricane should not turn here and maybe drift west to another 2, 3, 4 hours. Now it places it here, and it's close enough that Palm Beach County would get tornado warnings. That's how close this is and how critical it is that it turns on this current track. We do have a hurricane warning for the Treasure Coast. We have a hurricane watch for Palm Beach County for the next couple of days, and there's that warned area, and that's also offshore. And then a tropical storm watch for Palm Beach County, and a tropical storm warning, I should say, and a tropical storm watch for the inland areas where the wind should not be as strong, and a storm surge between 2 and 7 feet along the coastline. Quick look at the models once again before I toss it over to James. He has some new information coming in on the radar, but those tracks keeping it just offshore, too close to call, and it could get a little closer to us, and that's why we have the warnings and the watches in place right now. James.
Yeah, still that well-defined eye, and I put the lightning strikes. Look at all the lightning right around, right in that eye wall there, just really flaring up too. A sign that this thing, it's not weakening. Abaco here, and we're going to see it start to approach, well, pretty much the western or the eastern end of Grand Bahama there, starting to get into the eye wall. We're already seeing some of these far outer bands move through, and any one of these little cells that move in, and you see some coming into say right around Jensen Beach, Stewart, or so, see it right there, some lightning strike. That's going to be a strong one right there. It might be a marine warning with that one too, as it moves on in with probably 30, 35 mile per hour wind gusts. We had some tornado warnings where some of those little cells ran into the sea breeze down in the southwest Florida. So that's the type of thing we may see here in South Florida. And then rainfall amounts, of course, hurricanes, tremendous rainfall makers. This yellow here is 15 plus inches. That stays offshore, thank goodness. And we just get the kiss here with the rain. The red there is 5 to 6 inches. But if this just inches a little bit closer, that's a whole different ball game. We may see our rainfall totals go from 5 to 6 inches or so, jumping all the way up to over 10 inches. So something we're going to keep an eye on. And of course, we do have a storm surge. We're going to talk about this, the winds and the wave heights here coming up in just a few minutes.
James, thank you. Florida Power and Light says it has spent the past several days preparing for Hurricane Dorian. There are about 16,000 workers either already staged or heading out across the state. FPL says it is one of the largest contingency plans it's had for a storm. However, the president and CEO of the company is reminding people there will be power outages. FPL says wind speeds need to be 35 miles per hour or less for them to work on repairing those power lines. Remember, WPTV will remain on the air if your power goes out. We have radio partners. They're all listed here on your screen. We have them on our website as well. If we need to simulcast, listen on your radio, or it's a great time to download our app, and that way you can stay connected with us online, and we stream our coverage as well. We'll be right back.
Right now, mandatory evacuations in effect for some areas in Palm Beach County. Those orders are for zones A and B. You can check those out on our app and also with your Palm Beach County resources and Palm Beach County links to make sure you know what zone you're in and if it's time to leave.
The monster of a storm and continued uncertainty of where exactly Dorian will hit if it makes landfall in Florida has many people not taking chances. Brian Hughes talked to families who were racing to get out of their homes.
For Rafael Gonzalez, it's a race against time. He's taking measurements and boarding up the porch at his home inside the Bluegrass Bubble Park in West Palm Beach. This community now under a mandatory evacuation ahead of Hurricane Dorian.
The police are coming in the morning and go around and tell everybody need to move.
Palm Beach County ordering evacuations for homes in Zone A and Zone B. That includes mobile homes, the barrier islands, low-lying areas prone to flooding, and communities near the intracoastal like Briny Breezes in Ocean Ridge.
We've always been very lucky, and this year we're not going to get away with it.
Betty Murray's grandson and son-in-law are boarding up her daughter's home. Betty lives only a few houses down. She has her bags packed and is ready to go.
Even if it does bypass us, we'll still be a lot safer if we move out.
7 shelters are also now open in Palm Beach County. But for Betty, she plans to ride out the storm with her granddaughter in Delray Beach.
Hoping it does a boomerang and heads back out, but you never know. I hope it doesn't hit the Carolinas. That's also home for some of our families, so.
And 2 more shelters opened up this evening, bringing the total now to 9. That's in addition to a pet-friendly shelter and a special needs shelter. All of those locations can be found on our website at WPTV.com. Now, if you are evacuating and you're not heading to one of those shelters, officials advise you to stay in Palm Beach County and do not head further north. In Jupiter, Ryan Hughes, WPTV, News Channel 5.
As we have been showing you, the Bahamas hit hard by Hurricane Dorian. We'll speak to a woman who stayed in her home as the hurricane went over, the impact her area felt.
Neighbors helping neighbors, the community where everyone's making sure everyone is protected. Category 5 storm that has devastated parts of the Bahamas. We talked to Rosie Lopez in Eleuthera, Bahamas, by phone as Hurricane Dorian's powerful feeder bands passed over her home. She says she did not experience a direct hit, but she did experience tropical force winds.
It's pretty ugly right now. We're like in the outer band. The surf's really, really rough and high right now. The wind's blowing. I've lost a few trees out back and in the front. And I thought it'd be over by now, but we've been getting hit all night. And I think we lost power sometime between 3 a.m. and 6 a.m. Praying for the people of Abaco and Grand Bahama, because I can't even imagine that storm hitting here at that strength.
Sadly, we've seen reports in the Abaco Islands, winds 185 miles an hour, devastation. Roofs, cars flipped. It is beyond description. We don't use that term lightly, but it gave me chills seeing the video earlier. This, again, tropical storm force winds in North Eleuthera, but in Abaco, utter devastation.
And Marsh Harbor, I have 3
Marsh
pieces of video on my Facebook page right now that were sent by a friend of a friend, and it is devastating. Steve Weagle's joining us now. Steve, I just want to ask, Susan Meyer on Facebook was asking, and I thought this was a good question, if the storm does turn, or if it does not, how much notice would we have before there would be a landfall?
Well, we would be 60 miles on a little rough math here, but that turn is expected to happen about 60 to 70 miles off the coast around West End, so it'll be right in this area here. And let's say, continued on that trend, moving west right now at 5 miles an hour. So you're looking at another 8 to 12 hours, I suppose. I do, though, we may have a little bit more time before a landfall, because it is expected to slow down even more in this area. So it went down a couple of days ago. It was moving 13 miles an hour to the west, and then it was down to 10, and now we're down to 5 miles an hour. So it's really slowing down. That's not a surprise. That was expected. But once it gets into this area tomorrow, it could be even slower. It could be just a snail's pace at 2 to 3 miles an hour, which we really classify as drifting, not so much a forward speed.
And Steve, of course, as you've reminded us, even at that, we'd be feeling the outer bands for hours and hours on end. They pack their own kind of punch.
Yeah, well, you can see on the radar behind me how some of these feeder bands are already starting to work in. We have some that are working down through the Treasure Coast and into Palm Beach County, and we have others that are just offshore. They actually pack more of a punch. This one here, I'm keeping an eye on. I don't think this itself will move in. Each one of these is moving 40, 50, 60 miles an hour in forward speed, but as it moves toward us, it's really just moving 5 to 10 miles an hour. It's moving with the entire hurricane. But this would be about 30 to 40 miles off the coast, so this is going to take another few hours. But you can see some of these are starting to fire up. One in Stewart now, so we're going to be talking more about the radar. The radar, Viper 5 Max, is our best tool once we get the storm a little closer. Well, in fact, at this point, the radar is transitioning to be our best tool. And here's the radar showing the tops of some of the thunderstorms. Very surprising little thing going on in this hurricane in the last few hours, and that is that the core is loaded with lightning. James showed a loop just a few minutes ago. This entire area has lightning wrapping around it. Lightning is not a common feature in a hurricane. And research is showing that usually when there's lightning, it is preceded by some upgrade in the winds. Now, this hurricane can't get much stronger. It's pretty much at its limit, but it's interesting to see all that lightning in such a well-developed hurricane. It's about 10 miles wide, this eye, and the lightning is completely encircled around the eye wall right now. And you can see with the cross-section some of these thunderstorms as they work in, and then the outer feeder bands as they work through too. But these are the ones that are going to affect us first, and that'll be in the next 6 to 12 hours. I want to break down you're going to bet you'll wake up. This eye is going to be in this area right here. It is going to be an amazing thing to see on the satellite imagery, that this storm that is so close and is razor thin to our area as far as the turn. And that's why there's a hurricane warning for the Treasure Coast and a hurricane watch for Palm Beach County.
Steve, I know our focus, of course, for our 5-county area, but so many people here have children away at college. We certainly remember those days. Kelly and Renee asked, kids are away in college in Gainesville. Will that area have hurricane winds flooding its section?
Not likely. With the current track, the eye is expected to stay offshore. So both Tallahassee and Gainesville. Gainesville could certainly see tropical storm force winds. They're some of the outer feeder bands, but as far as damaging winds, that looks unlikely at this point.
Question two, Debbie Harvey wanted to know about storm surge estimates, specifically in Sewell's Point, but really any area. When would we see the biggest storm surge, and is Sewell's Point expected to get a big one?
Monday and Tuesday, and it'll be during the high tide times. And the other factor here that we're in the king tide, and anyone who lives near the coastline is already seeing the water level elevated by a foot or two. Storm surge kicking in. Like in previous storms, you kind of use a baseline of what you've seen in the past as far as how high the water level got. You throw that out the window. It's not going to work this time because we had these king tides, and at high tide, the new moon is, this week. And with those extra high tides, the water level is going to be elevated another 1, 2, and I think in some areas I saw almost 3 feet because of that. Now, the elevated tides should be kicking in soon because now we have that northeast wind pushing the water against the coastline. I would expect it would peak on Monday and Tuesday as the storm is at its closest, and the wind field has expanded. For the big storm surge, not only do you need strong winds, you need what we call it fetch, where the wind travels over a large area of water before it has an impact on the coastline, and this one is developing that with such a large tropical storm wind field now. So Monday and Tuesday, I think at high tide times, we're going to see some coastal flooding.
Thanks as always. Go ahead, Colin.
No, I was just going to say, I know you wanted to bring in, is James Whelan next? Or
Yeah, James, I think is going to talk some of the local facts, and actually he's getting over there. I'll just ramble on for another minute here. There's
No rambling. You two have been a great analytical team for us.
Thank you. Yeah,
We speak for every viewer in 5 counties to say thanks to both of you.
I think we're going to be in this for a while too, because not only do we have the hurricane watch, we have the warning too. There's the lightning that I was talking about near the center. This is very unusual. This is not typical. This happened with Katrina just before landfall in Florida. As Katrina hit Florida before it moved off to New Orleans. And so we're going to watch for that trend too. All right, here's James. I believe he's going to talk more about the wind speed and some of the models.
Right, and we'll time it out. I was just checking our National Weather Service chat there. We're in constant communication with the Weather Service, the Hurricane Center. They send us stuff, we send them stuff there. So another great resource we have right here at WPTV. Now, all right, so let's go through time here and so you know what to expect. Now, these are gusts. These aren't sustained winds, but you should always plan for gusts because that's the highest amount that you may see. So as we go through Sunday night, we could, and Monday morning here, this is 9:30 in the morning, we could see gusts in some areas, and some of the stronger squalls, up to tropical storm force or so. The core of the storm still well offshore, the green, the orange here representing hurricane force winds, the blue tropical storm force winds. And as we go through time, notice how our numbers go way up too. We're in the 60s for gusts. 63 mile per hour gusts there possible in North County, 50s, 40s, and 50s for the Treasure Coast. Again, that line, that razor thin line Steve was talking about, just offshore. Any little wobble closer, we're going to be in this hurricane force wind there. And then finally by late Tuesday, closest to the Treasure Coast, then by Wednesday morning, starting to pull away and things drop off. So with all that wind, we are piling up the wave action. In fact, look at this. These 20 to 35 feet out in the Gulf Stream here, just enormous waves. Off the scale here, too. I had to type it in special. You add that all piling on in out of the northeast and east. You add into the king tide, and this is about the peak of it. It's midnight tomorrow night with the peak of the wave action, the surge, and also the king tide. It does start to abate a little bit for the next high tide cycle, which would be around noon on Tuesday. And then finally, as we get into Wednesday, things relax quite a bit. Our beaches will take quite a beating from all of this. And I know a lot of my surfer friends are saying, hey, this is going to be epic surf out there. But really, in our area, it's just too close. It's just, if it was farther off, it would be epic surf, but it's just too close for that. Head south or just don't go at all. We'll get the next one then. All right, so this is the storm surge you see in Palm Beach County. Anywhere from 2 to 4 feet is possible. The Treasure Coast, a little bit more. It's a little bit more concave, and the storm's getting a little bit closer there. So that's why we have those storm surge warnings out there. We'll be right back.
Welcome back. Here's a look at our storm, Dorian, 185-mile-an-hour winds moving through the Abaco is about a little over 150 miles away from South Florida. The tropical storm and hurricane force winds, hurricane force out 45 miles from the center, and you can see on the radar that the outer bands are working now to South Florida. These bands have some heavy rain, some gusty winds, and it is getting closer to our area, moving away from Abaco now, and the 8 p.m. advisory just came in, so the winds are kept at 185, still moving west at 5. The pressure's risen a little to 915. A little encouraging. I don't think in the long term it's going to help us, though. As the pressure rises, we may see a slight decrease in the wind speed, but at 185 miles an hour, it would have to drop, or that pressure would have to drop significantly. So we get into hurricane warning for the Treasure Coast Hurricane Watch for Palm Beach County and a tropical storm warning. We will see gusty winds develop overnight and into Monday and Tuesday. And the closest approach will be on the Treasure Coast on Tuesday with this less about 40 to 50 miles off the coast, right in that edge of hurricane force winds. So that is why the warning is in place, and that's why any shift toward the west is critical and would bring just a tremendous increase in the wind speed for us in South Florida.
Steve, thank you.
We'll be right back after this.
This is WPTV Storm Team 5, tracking Dorian.
And thank you for being with us yet again for our continuing coverage on Hurricane Dorian. Safe to say, everyone in 5 counties, indeed across the state and really the country, watched this monumentally powerful storm.
We want to bring in our chief meteorologist, Steve Weigel. And Steve, you know, our viewers are such a big part of our coverage these days, thanks to social media and Facebook. And Clarabelle Cruz was asking, does Dorian rank as one of the biggest ever?
You know, for the northwestern Bahamas, it does. And as far as intensity, 185 miles an hour puts it in the record books too. It could go a little higher. The central pressure has dropped a bit. If you take a look back at this area of the Bahamas and historically, hurricanes, the last one, this big one that rolled through would have been Floyd in 99. That had a track. That Floyd, if you hear it during that year, that's the one that spent about 2,000 miles headed right for us and turned at the last minute and moved up toward the Carolina coastline. It had 154 mile an hour winds, I believe was the peak speed. And you have to go back, I believe in the 1920s, or maybe a little bit earlier, there was a historic hurricane that went through that area that devastated some of the towns. This one, the most powerful though, and it is starting to roll away from Abaco and move closer to the Freeport and Grand Bahama. There's a look at the radar. This is the current radar. So it's almost making landfall now in Grand Bahama, and this is a very, very bad track. And I know we have some viewers in Grand Bahama. Well, we have viewers all over this area on satellite, and it will track right down the spine, and there are indications that it may stall, at least briefly, on the western end of the island. There's a look. Lots of lightning going on near the center of this, too. A little unusual, even for a well-structured hurricane like this. So here's the forecast track. This will be updated at 11 o'clock with the new 8 p.m. numbers, too. There's an intermediate advisory. So it has slowed down in the last 2 hours, now moving west at 5, 185. The pressure has risen a bit. It's now 915 millibars. The hurricane hunters have been flying through it the last few hours, and there are indications that it is continue on this west track for at least the overnight hours, and then a turn toward the northwest. That happens tomorrow, and the timeline with everything else with this hurricane has been delayed a little bit. It looks like that turn will happen between about noon and 6 p.m. It's a slow, gradual turn back toward the northwest. So that is, at this point, the Tuesday 2 a.m., so just after midnight. And this is the Monday evening position. So this is just a gradual turn and then toward the northwest. And then it comes very close, not over yet, actually gets closer to the Treasure Coast offshore by about 40 to 50 miles and still a Category 4, and then rapidly moving up the East Coast after that and away. Let's take a close look at the error cone because it could still shift. That's really, well, we do have some strong winds coming in either way, even if it follows this down the line track. But any shift to the west, and this is a much more serious situation for all of our viewing area. So the error cone is across the Treasure Coast and parts of Palm Beach County. If you're in South County and you're looking at this like, oh, I'm out of the error cone, it's meaningless, really. It's absolutely meaningless because this error cone is not nasty weather and quiet weather. This error cone is for that little center point. So the track could be in this area right here. That is a possibility, and you would be in hurricane force winds. So there's a chance of that. So, and this error cone has been shifting back and forth, subtle, but shifting back and forth the last few days. So please remember that the error cone is the center of the storm, not where the winds, and it becomes nice. I think most people think that's the way that works, and it is not. Hurricane warning for the Treasure Coast, hurricane watch for Palm Beach County. James Wieland is here tracking it with me to talk more about the storm.
Yeah, we're seeing some early onset feeder bands starting to move on in. There's first rainfalls moving on in, and here's the storm there, so very close to us, but here's the outer fringes starting to come in. You see, here's a main band. This probably won't make it to us, or maybe it may brush the coastline, but we're tracking a few up here on the Treasure Coast, and even some that's made it down into Palm Beach County here. Let's take a closer look. A pretty hefty one moving through Fort Pierce right now. Another one moved through, say, Sewell's Point and down into Hobe Sound now. This